Hello, my name is Giovanni May, and this is my project over Derrick Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge serial killer. Before I dive into the main part of the video, I want to give you guys some time to look at some of the terms that I'm going to be using in the video. Now, for the reason you guys are all here today, my serial killer is Derrick Todd Lee. He is also known as the Baton Rouge serial killer. The crimes that he is known for range from 2001 until 2003, but he has also been connected to other crimes, which I'm going to talk about later in this video. So some history about him: he was born on November 5th, 1968. He has kind of a troubled family history. He didn't really have a stable upbringing. He had multiple siblings. He was poor. He grew up in the Baton Rouge area. I don't believe it's known if he um graduated or not. He was known to have like a low IQ and have just fights and things like that. He did eventually get married to his high school sweetheart. Her name was Jacqueline, and they ended up having two kids. And for the longest, he was kind of known as this like really nice, charming guy. He didn't have a steady employment, but when you did meet him, he was known as to be this super nice, friendly guy. I found out about this case through an episode of Forensic Files, which led me to a ID channel documentary on YouTube. I also read news articles, and there is a documentary on the Oxygen channel about his crime spree as well. Um, Surprisingly, he passed away 4 years ago on January 21st, 2016. He passed away while he was serving his prison sentence from a heart attack. So, like I said before, he has 7 victims tied to this crime spree at the time he was captured, which was in captured or charged, whichever way you want to look at it. At the time he was charged, he had 7 victims, but his criminal history timeline goes back to 1992. He his MO was breaking in, sexual assault, strangulation. He was known to follow his victims home. He chose his victims at random, and then the whole crime just went from there. The only victim that he did not sexually assault, I believe, is the second victim, which I'm going to talk about. So, like I said before, he has 7 victims tied to him at the time of his arrest in 2003, but he is tied to as many as 60 unsolved murders between the period of the early 90s to his capture in 2003. So his charges that he had previously to these murders were burglary, peeping tom, stalking, things of that nature. And so what I'm gonna do is talk about each victim that we know of during this crime spree. Then I'm gonna discuss the connected cases because those happened in a different time frame. Pictured before you is the first victim, Gina Wilson Green. She was murdered on September 24th, 2001. She was 40 years old. This crime happened near the LSU, which, if you don't know, is Louisiana State University. It is a big state school. It happened in this neighborhood. She was raped and strangled, and then after that crime took place, I believe he stole some valuables, and he also took her cell phone, which was later found a few weeks later in like a field. They just somebody stumbled upon it and turned it in, and then they connected it that it was Lee who committed the crime. The next victim is Geraldine DeSoto. She was murdered on January 14th, 2002 in Baton Rouge as well. She was discovered by her husband. He came home one day after work and just found her body just laying smack down in the middle of their home. And I believe she was the only one that was stabbed, but it's safe to assume that she was sexually assaulted as well. But when I was looking through the news reports, it only said that she was stabbed. And I guess you could say the most unfortunate thing about her case was that her husband was considered a suspect until the DNA they found underneath her fingernails was tied back to Lee. But for the longest, her husband was considered a suspect, and then he was eventually cleared when they found out that it was Lee that did it. This is the third victim, Charlotte Murray Pace. The This is the case that I say that like it like cracked the whole situation about Derrick Todd Lee open, because she was a 22-year-old MBA graduate of LSU. She was the youngest one to ever receive a degree from there at that time. But I think what like made her case the most like eye-opening for me was that she was stabbed over 80 times, and then after he stabbed her, he raped her, which I feel like is overkill to me, because if you go and read the reports, and there are documentaries like I said before that'll like show the DNA and pictures and things like that, that the DNA under her fingernails, like she was like fighting tooth and nail. She had a lot of defensive wounds all over her hands and arms and things like that, because she actively fought to her death, basically, if that makes sense. And she was 22 years old, and this crime happened on May 31st, 2002. Next is our fourth victim, Diane Alexander. This case happened in Bow Bridge, Louisiana, which is about 60 miles away from Baton Rouge. She was attacked after Lee asked to use the phone. So basically what he did was he knocked on her door. He asked for instructions or directions to find somebody or something. And he said, I needed to use your phone. Is that okay? She said sure. She didn't think anything of it. So she went and got her phone, let him use it, and went on about her business to get finished ready for work, because she had to go to work about 20 minutes from when he came and knocked on her door. When she turned her back, he got it was an old cord phone. He took the phone cord and he attempted to strangle her. And then when that didn't work, he started beating her because because she was resistant. So he began to beat her, and he beat her really bad, and he would have killed her if her son hadn't pulled up in the driveway and basically saved her life. Her son was able to get Lee's license plate number even though he ran out of the house and sped off. But she was the victim who was able to give police a sketch, and she also testified at trial. Now, there isn't a picture of her, because the one picture that I did find, I don't know if it was accurate, so I decided to not include it. And I only found one picture out of the multiples from other victims. So I think she just wants to live her life, not necessarily in obscurity, but she just doesn't want to draw attention to herself. So this is our fifth victim, Pam Kennemore. She was murdered on July 12th, 2002. She was 44 years old. Um, what this case essentially took a turn because she was the first victim to be taken from her home. Her body was dumped under the Whiskey Bay Bridge, which is like a underneath the freeway overpass in Baton Rouge. She was kidnapped, beaten, and raped. So what happened is, like with all the other victims, Derrick Todd Lee broke into her home and he committed the crime. It was kind of unclear the order in which it happened, but there was blood found in her home. Her husband came home about an hour after, I guess, the crime had occurred, and he noticed that his wife wasn't there, but there was blood on the floor and the door was open and things like that. So he called police and called close family and friends to see where she was. And then, unfortunately, a few days to a week later, that is when it was motorists on the highway found her body, and this was also in Baton Rouge. This is our sixth victim. Her name is Tranisha Dene Cologne. She was 23 years old, and this occurred on November 21st, 2002. Now this is where the details get kind of fishy. Um, some reports say that she was kidnapped from her Lafayette home. Other reports say that she was abducted from the cemetery where she was visiting her mother's grave because her mother had passed a few months earlier. But regardless, um, to to which one, the she was kidnapped. At the end of the day, she was kidnapped, beaten, and raped. But her body was found in the city of Scott, Louisiana, 3 days later by some hunters. And what makes this victim so significant was that she was the first black victim and she was the first non-Baton Rouge victim. Even though, yes, there is Diane Alexander and that did happen in Broke Ridge, that's considered a suburb of Baton Rouge, whereas Lafayette is not. It's its own city and has its own metropolitan area and things like that. Okay, here is our final victim for this case. Her name was Carrie Lynn Yoder. This happened on March 3rd, 2003. This happened in Baton Rouge near Louisiana State University. She was at home and she was also kidnapped or not seen from her home from about, I think the time record stated the March 3rd, between March 3rd and March 4th. Nobody could account for where she was. And her body was found 10 days later on March 13th underneath the Whiskey Bay Bridge as well. She was beaten, raped, and strangled, which was a part of the MO. And she was a 26-year-old doctoral student at LSU. And she is the case that essentially tied um, everything together. It was this case, Geraldine DeSoto, and Charlotte Murray Pace that it all seemed to be tied to because of DNA. Because what how the investigation went, and I'll talk about this in a second, was that they knew there was a serial killer on the loose, but they obviously couldn't figure out who, and they had samples of Derrick Lee's DNA because they had took it from the other victims, and then they took it from this victim, Carolyn Yoder, and that's how they were able to tie that it was him. Okay, now for the connected cases, and I call these connected cases because they weren't found out about, for lack of a better phrase, until the trial was over. Like they had suspected Derrick Todd Lee, but couldn't really find any solid proof, or either the statute of limitations had expired. So for the first case, there is a picture of two women on the screen. On the on my left hand side, the lady with the glasses, her name was Connie Warner, and she disappeared from her Zachary, Louisiana home, which is a little bit north of Baton Rouge. She disappeared from her home in August of 1992, and then um, her body was found a short time later, nude in a ditch. She was 41 years old, and still to this day, her family and police feel like Derrick Todd Lee did it, but there was no like solid proof. But this is a case that he was connected to. And then for the redheaded woman that is next to her, her name is Randy Meebrower, and she was also kidnapped from her Zachary, Louisiana home, but this happened in April 1998, so 6 years later. Her body has never been found, but the evidence at the crime scene matched Lee's DNA, and she was 28 years old. So they couldn't necessarily. I don't. Still to this day, I still believe that he should have been charged for it, but I still don't know why he wasn't charged for it. I think he should have been, but these two cases are kind of, to me, like the start of his serial killing spree. It just didn't occur during the same time frame as the other cases, but I feel like it should be included. And then the last connected case that we know of is from 1993. It was an assault on a young couple at a Zachary, Louisiana cemetery. It was Michelle Chapman and her male friend. We assume it was her boyfriend, but it was never said. They were at the cemetery just talking about life, and just wanted to, clear their head and things like that, because they were 15 and 16 at the time, so they just wanted somewhere where they could talk privately. And then, who was later found out to be Derrick Todd Lee, um, attacked the couple with a machete, and I can't remember which one, but he attacked one of them and almost severed their foot off. So essentially, basically they could have been murdered that same day. And I believe it wasn't until 2003, when the other cases were coming about, that Michelle Chapman, the female victim, later identified Lee as her attacker. But unfortunately, the statute of limitations expired, so there was nothing that really couldn't be done. But I feel like something should have been done, because at the end of the day, somebody was attacked with a machete, and these could have been two more murders. So I feel like something should have been done at that point. But these are all of the connected cases that we know about. In the documentaries that I spoke of at the beginning, they all say he is tied to, I want to say the number is at least 60 murders or attacks between 1992 and the time he was arrested in 2003. With these cases that I've mentioned um being in that number. So it could go from 60 in these to being closer to the hundreds range. So Derrick Todd Lee was captured on May 27th, 2003 in Atlanta, Georgia. The reason he wasn't captured in Baton Rouge was because after the police were tying the cases together using his DNA, the case that got tied back to his DNA was Kerry Lynn Yoder. So what the police did was they got a search warrant and they went to his last known address. He wasn't there. They contacted his wife. His wife said they had packed up and unenrolled their kids out of school and went to Atlanta. So this tells me that Derrick Todd Lee knew that he was gonna get caught, so he attempted to flee, and he did. He went to Atlanta. He was living in a housing project there, and so what they did to not arouse suspicion and have him leave again was they had a task force. I'll say that. A task force, for those of you don't know, is when state, federal, local law enforcement all get together to solve a case. And so this is what happened on this case as well. They contacted Atlanta police, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, I believe, and they all were able to pull their resources together and eventually capture him. Like, they surrounded the place where he was living at and made sure that he didn't come out and attempt to flee. They caught him. Then there was a press conference with the Atlanta police chief at the time, thanking everybody for doing everything to make sure that he was captured, and then he was extradited back to Baton Rouge that same week. Okay, now on to the trial and conviction part. So, he was only tried for 2 cases. They say that these are the 2 cases with the strongest evidence against Sweet. I don't feel like that's right, but I'm gonna get into my feelings of the case and how everything went down after I go through this part. So we're gonna save that for a few more minutes. Anyway, the 2 cases that he was tried for was the murders of Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte Murray Pace. The Geraldine DeSoto case happened first. It happened on August 10th, 2004, and he was sentenced to second-degree murder. And I feel like he should not have been sentenced to second-degree murder, but according to the definition, it to me, I feel like it should have been first degree murder for both, but according to the definition of second degree murder, it is killing of a human being when the offender has a specific intent to kill or to inflict great bodily harm, or when the offender is engaged in the perpetration or attempted perpetration of aggravated or first degree rape, forcible or second degree rape, aggravated arson, burglary, kidnapping, escape, and other things. I feel like it still falls into first degree murder. but he was convicted of that on August 10th, 2004. And then 2 months later, on October 13th, he was convicted of first-degree murder for Charlotte Murray Pace. And with these, he got death for both of these. But as I said in the beginning, he didn't see an execution date because he died of a heart attack in prison. Now on to my feelings about the case. I don't I don't think the task force handled it well. Um it was like they dropped the ball and weren't connecting the cases as early as I felt like they should have. Like like obviously we don't know when a serial killer is going to strike. If we did, we would obviously catch him sooner. So that's not the issue. It was kind of like they weren't really putting these cases together until like Carrie Lynn Yoder happened. And Carrie Lynn Yoder was the last victim, and that happened in 2003, and the first case happened in 2001. And so I felt like had they um connected everything together sooner, there would have, to me, there would have been less victims that happened. And also, there was an FBI profiler, obviously, because when you're dealing with a serial killer, you kind of want to know what that person is like. So, the FBI profile of Derrick Todd Lee was that he was a white man, loner, I believe early to mid 30s, didn't get along with women, things like that. And when you see the trial video, you will see that he is of a different race, which I feel like I understand why they assume it was a white man, because over 90% of serial killers are white men. But in this case, they were so dead hung up on that they weren't willing to other they weren't willing to look at other avenues, basically. And it was just a lot of, I don't know, they were so focused on like finding also they had a white truck. Somebody pointed out that it was a white truck that Derrick Todd Lee was driving. This was another thing that they got so hung up on, which was not true. He was driving a car, I believe, not a white truck. So that was another thing that hindered the case, because they kept on looking for a white truck, and they kept on looking for a white man with all of these specifications that got laid out. And I also feel like his wife knew, but she was protecting her husband, and I don't see why she did that, because he was basically on a 12-year crime spree, and she just stood by him like it was okay, which I don't feel like is right. But to each his own. um I feel like going back to the crimes he was charged for, I feel like I don't feel like it was right just to charge him for the two, when you clearly have evidence that ties him to all seven. Like, there's no reason that he should not have been charged for all seven, regardless of the fact that he's dead now. At the time, he wasn't dead when he got convicted, so I feel like he should have got 7 life sentences, because, well, no, 6 life sentences, and then aggravated attempted murder charge for Diane Alexander, because at the end of the day, six women are dead, and one is essentially scarred for life. And I feel like yes, did these two cases give all the give the situation of Derrick Todd Lee getting off the street justice? Yes, but I feel like each victim's family should have gotten their own separate due day, if that makes any sense. But I just want to say I appreciate you guys watching this video, and for the last 2 minutes, there's going to be the trial. I can't remember which victim it is for. I believe it is for Charlotte Murray Pace, but now you'll be able to see what the perpetrator looks like. And then, like I said again, he did pass away in 2016 from a heart attack. So there, um, he is not. He's basically dead and gone, and will never hurt anybody again. But I want to say thank you for you guys watching this video, and watch the last 2 minutes for the trial. Thanks.
Defense attorneys are trying to spare Derrick Lee's life by putting on the stand some of his family members in hopes jurors will have sympathy. But most importantly, defense attorneys say they will soon produce evidence that shows Derrick Lee is mentally retarded, which means by law he cannot be sentenced to death. Derrick Lee's attorneys are fighting to spare him from the death penalty, which he could be sentenced to for murdering Murray Pace. The defense says they have evidence Lee is mentally retarded, which means under a Supreme Court ruling, he cannot be executed.
80% of people that suffer from mental retardation fall in the mild mental retardation category. They can function, they can work. It is something that I previously did not know. Embarrassingly, I did not know that.
The prosecution will counter defense claims with their own expert testimony, and ultimately jurors will decide if Lee is mentally handicapped or not.
This is first time under the new law, but in every capital case I've ever prosecuted in my life, there's been mental health experts either saying not guilty by reason of insanity or saying diminished capacity under mitigating circumstances. It's just a new version of the same old thing that we've faced hundreds of times.
The defense put on the stand Lee's sister, Tasha Fontenot. She apologized to victims' family members, but said her brother has good qualities and has 3 children. She stated, quote, "Derrick, he's still my brother, and he's been there for me, and I miss him." Murray Pace's family members also had a chance to speak and brought practically the entire courtroom to tears as they spoke about their love for Murray and how her death affected them.
I hope they'll remember the pictures they saw, remember the descriptions we gave, and take that with them to deliberate, because if they do, I do not see how they could possibly return a verdict other than death.